Hey everybody, Dr. Nick here. I'm excited to be recording another episode of the Hospitality Spirit podcast. We've been off for a couple months on our winter break, but now we are back and we are recording. And based on what I'm seeing on the schedule for the next couple weeks and months, we've got some amazing guests coming up. But today, we have a very, very special guest, our first full recording of 2022, and I couldn't imagine having a better guest to kick us off. Today, I'm joined by Simon Machin. Simon is an undergraduate student at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois. Growing up in Santa Maria, California, Simon came to DePaul to pursue his dream of becoming a film producer. And in 2022, Simon assumed the role of podcast editor and sound engineer for the Hospitality Spirit podcast, a show focused on bridging the gap between higher education and the hospitality industry. Simon's been making videos for half his life, both as a hobby and professionally. He operated a YouTube channel for several years, which allowed him to achieve countless milestones in the world of social media. Prior to undertaking his studies at DePaul, Simon managed the social media for his high school. In this role, he oversaw the social media presence and developed both educational and marketing material, including the highly visible Class of 2020's virtual graduation. Building on his years of experience, Simon is currently developing and editing content for an audio drama currently in production at Violet Hour Media. In his free time, Simon enjoys studying Japanese and writing movie and television scripts. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to welcome Simon to the podcast. How you doing, Simon?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm really great. And the next chapter of the Hospitality Spirit story is now underway officially. The listeners of the podcast and longtime listeners will know we had a great podcast editor and sound engineer, Jamie. Jamie is having tremendous success in his career, and he moved on to bigger and brighter things. But you have now filled that role, and I couldn't be more excited. We've had a chance to talk a bunch of times over the last couple weeks, getting ready for this, but now it's official. You're on the Hospitality Spirit team.
Yeah, I know. It's an interesting experience so far.
Yeah, I think it's, this is always a great learning experience. And the fact that, and we're going to talk a lot about your background today, but when I saw your resume come across my desk, it was a no-brainer. Like you immediately checked all the boxes that I was looking for a sound engineer and podcast editor, and I think it's going to be great. So why don't we always start with the present, and we always work our way backwards, as listeners will know. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing here at DePaul?
So obviously, I'm this podcast's editor, but at the same time, I'm working on another podcast, very differently styled podcast with Violet Hour Media, and this is an audio drama. And the difference between this and an audio drama is that this is it's like an interview style kind of podcast, but an audio drama is like a more in line with a movie. So there's actors, there's a script. And my job, I'm officially the editor for that. I take all the correct takes, I put them all in the correct order. I problem solve with our sound designer to make sure everything's working okay. But I've been on that project for about a year now, and I've done a little bit of everything throughout the whole project,
Hmm.
from the beginning of the script to reviewing the script and making changes to that. I was sitting in on the recordings, making sure that the recordings were okay, that they all followed the scripts and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I think I'm on episode 11 out of 13. And once that's done, and once the sound designer finishes, we should have that up probably by next month.
That's great. That's great. So you really kind of found your niche, if you will. What made you pick DePaul to help you pursue your dream of being a film producer?
Well, DePaul is, I think, regarded as one of the best film schools in the country.
Hmm.
And, I applied to a couple of them, but when you live in California, it's actually surprisingly difficult to get into a California college. But DePaul, I mean, they sent out their acceptance letter like months and months before any other college did.
Hmm.
So I had a couple other options. Boston University was the other big one, but I decided that DePaul, I think, would just be a better fit for me, and how I operate, and in pursuing my dreams of producing videos.
That's great. So in terms of the area of study that you're looking at is in the College of Computing and Digital Media. We sometimes refer to it as CDM. So what sort of classes are you taking as part of your degree to I mean, is the assumption that you're going to have all the knowledge, skills, and abilities you're going to need at the end of this 4-year journey to start making film, or are you kind of going to get the basics, but in reality, you got to just get out there and start making them and get that experience? How does that curriculum look and prepare you for your eventual career?
So I've chosen the focus of being creative production, is what it's officially called. And looking in the schedule, especially the schedule that I had this year, that basically means that they kind of give you the basic class in every single thing regarded to film. And then eventually you get into more specific production courses when you get into the second and third year curriculum. So for this year, my freshman year, it was everything from like cinematography to script writing to all sorts of stuff. And because I'm working on podcasts as well as taking my classes, I would immediately put those skills into effect. And it was actually it's a bit funny because I took a sound design class this quarter, and that was when I had to start editing for Violet Hour Media. So I had to teach myself how to use the sound design equipment faster than I would learn in class
Hmm.
because I needed to know it in order to do it for my job.
Got it.
But even by doing the classes, I could learn the more technical aspects. I could ask the teacher questions about what was going wrong for my projects.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm kind of in a lucky position to be able to learn it, but also be able to put it into practice at the same time. And that's been very helpful.
That's very, very cool. This is admittedly an area, clearly I'm a podcast host, but the actual production and editing and particularly video, it's fascinating to me to learn about it and see it. But I think one of the aspects that has really been so intriguing is engaging with you and other students from the CDM college is this isn't something that all of a sudden you just decided your senior year of high school, this is what I want to do. Most of the people, and it sounds like you reading your bio and kind of talking to you over the last couple months, is this is something you've really loved for most of your adult life. I mean, you've been making videos for half of your life. And so this is something that you always kind of knew you wanted to do. And I think that's really inspiring that at such a young age, you knew, I really want to be a film producer and I really want to go to school for this. And I really want to work on videos and audio podcasts and I want to write scripts, and you've just totally immersed yourself in this side of life, and that's really great to see.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of it's funny for me because you said, all of my adult life, but all of my adult life is like 1 year because I'm only 18.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, let's just say half of your post-adolescent life.
Yeah, because when you're a kid, you kind of experiment with all sorts of different things. But I was in a unique position because my father was also a filmmaker.
Oh, okay.
He went to college for film. He started his business by making film. So he had all the equipment already, and he had all the software already.
Interesting.
So when I was a kid, I would grow up, I would uh, experiment with all sorts of different things, and none of it really clicked. And my parents couldn't really help me because it was just some random thing they knew nothing about.
Mhm,
But when I said I wanted to make a video about whatever I wanted to make when I was like, 10,
mhm,
my dad was like, okay, well, here's my old camera, here's my old editing accounts and stuff like that. And
mhm.
then I could learn that and I could figure it out on my own,
Interesting.
and I just kind of just kept doing it in a bunch of different ways and kept finding new opportunities and new avenues to explore this explore like my passion of making videos, which I developed at a really early age.
Yeah. So it was almost like you were doing for lack of a better term, it's like you were almost doing an internship as a child. You were I mean, so I wonder if we can give you credit for that, for college credit for that, but another discussion another time. But um, did you have a sense at that moment what type of film? I mean, do you have to, I mean, and pardon my ignorance here, but do you have to kind of decide, I want to be a documentary filmmaker, or I want to shoot action adventures, or I want to do dramas, or did you kind of know at that time what it was, or was that just part of the self exploration process?
Well, obviously you can't be making cinematic masterpieces when you're a teenager, and honestly I don't think I really ever figured that out.
Hmm.
Because when you're doing production type work, it doesn't actually matter what you make
Hmm.
because it's all really the same.
Yeah.
the audience will see a horror movie and they'll see a romantic comedy very differently, but really behind the scenes, they're made in very similar ways.
Hmm.
So when I was learning kind of production skills, scheduling, planning, editing, recording, negotiation, stuff like that, I could then apply that to anything. And what I did at YouTube and what I did at high school and what I'm doing now with podcasts, they're all very different end results, but I made them in pretty much the same way. And that's really how it's going to how it's going to work in the future, is that I learn these skills, I can apply it to whatever I want. It doesn't necessarily have to be a specific genre.
Hmm. It's interesting because I might be dating myself here, but when I was a kid, and we're obviously a little bit of ways in terms of our age, but the idea of podcasts and the idea of YouTube just wasn't even in the scope of reference. But I mean, did you kind of grow up with this? You grew up with YouTube, and I mean, if you're 18 years old right now, you've been making movies and doing stuff for half your life. That would put you right about 9 or 10 years old. So you basically grew up with the concept of YouTube, podcasts, and social media. This isn't new to you, correct?
Yeah, not even I mean, YouTube, it was made a few years after I was born.
Uh huh.
So we're my age and YouTube's age are roughly the same. So I did grow up with YouTube a lot. And part of what got me into editing, at least, was, watching Minecraft's YouTube videos when I was like in elementary school. And then I'm like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
So I did that for about a year. I made really terrible, like, Minecraft YouTube videos with my friend.
You say they're terrible now, but when you become a famous producer, that original YouTube video is going to be worth its weight in gold. They will show it in your biopic when you're getting an award somewhere. Be like, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first YouTube video that Simon ever created.
I mean, if people can find it, I think my parents may have taken it down at some point, but
Things on the internet live forever.
I know. But that is the culture that I grew up with,
Hmm.
and it is a very different. I mean, it's confusing because on one hand, it's very different from a lot of what previous generations grew up with, but on the other hand, it isn't really. Like, people always kind of compare that. Saying that, oh, I have a YouTube channel was the same thing as saying I'm in a band. You know,
Hmm.
a few decades ago, like, that was kind of the thing that all the kids did, was that they claimed they were in a band, but that didn't really mean anything.
Absolutely. I played the drums as a kid, and I would have sworn to people I was in a band, but you know what? It was just me playing my drums in my basement. A band of one.
So it's the same thing with YouTube, is that sure, you make it, but just because you make a YouTube video doesn't actually mean it's good or has any quality,
Mhm.
or you can really measure any success off of that. I am a bit different because when I after Minecraft I stopped for a bit, but then I came back to make history videos, like educational videos,
Interesting.
and that actually did have some success.
Interesting.
One video in particular, I think it's been a while since I looked at it last, but it was like, I think, has like over 800,000 views. Um,
800,000
yeah,
views?
and
Oh my gosh.
that really shook me, because like, because before that I made a couple of videos before that one, and they were just kind of, I did it for fun, but it was kind of more like, I want to make a YouTube video about the stuff that I like. So I made about one a week, put a lot of effort into the actual video quality. I wrote the scripts, I narrated them myself, I edited them and did little animations for them and stuff like that.
Holy cow.
Um, and then this random video just suddenly became super popular. And like, in a week, I went from 100 subscribers to 1,000 subscribers, which is like a really, really big deal when you're doing YouTube. And then I kind of felt obliged to keep making them, so I just kept making a video every week for about 2 years and got about 20,000 subscribers and a million total views.
How old were you when you hit that 800,000?
I was 14.
How does that I mean, do you, I, I'm for the first time in podcast history, I'm actually speechless. Um, and if people know me, they know that that's a rarity. Um, what was that like? I mean, did you kind of were you already on to the next week's content, and then all of a sudden you open up your dashboard and you see 800,000 people? I mean, what was that moment like? Can you remember it?
Well, obviously, it didn't reach 800,000 views
Sure,
overnight,
yeah,
but
I get that. But you saw a massive spike
mhm.
over. I mean, could we say that it went viral? I mean, is that a accurate description?
Yeah, I mean, kind of the definition of viral may not fit this, but compared to like my small YouTube channel, it was a very big deal. And I think I started making those videos after I graduated eighth grade and was in the summer before I started high school. So I kind of went into high school, like the first few weeks of high school, that started.
You were a YouTube star when you started high school. You automatically were at the peak of the social ladder. You were an influencer.
Yeah, and I don't tend to tell. I mean, I didn't tend to tell people much about it
Mhm,
because it was a lot of work and a lot of stress, and I just didn't want to have it really be something that happened while I was in school.
sure.
But eventually people would find out, and they would all be surprised about it. But
Mhm,
I was also making tons of videos for the school as well, so no one was really surprised. But yeah, YouTube, being a teenager and being, decently successful with YouTube was very, very strange.
mhm.
Because when you're a high schooler, like your greatest concerns are like, asking a girl out to prom or trying to give a presentation in front of the class. But
Oh my gosh, we could do a whole podcast on how awkward it was for me to ask girls out in high school.
yeah.
Let's see how the audience responds to that. If you'd like to hear that podcast, we can talk about that, but I don't think we ought to.
Yeah, so that's like the average concern, but for me, my concerns was like making sure I had all these videos up every week, and because it's history, it's that kind of dips into politics, like
Yeah.
having to deal with what will the potential backlash be if I make a video on the Civil
Yeah,
War,
very different time at that, very different time than where we are now. But I guess it wasn't too long ago. I mean, I guess we're only talking 5 years ago at the end of the day.
Yeah, I know.
Are you still doing that YouTube channel?
No. So what kind of happened was I made history, and the reason that one video that got really popular was something called alternate history. And alternate history is kind of like thought experiments of like, okay, if we took this historical event and we changed it, what would happen? And I was kind of, interested in it as kind of like, for fun, but it's not real history, so I didn't really give it that much credit at the time. But then it was really, really popular, and the videos I made on alternate history were much more they did much better than my regular history ones. So then I kind of felt forced to make those because if I wanted to be successful, I had to make a certain type of content, the content that actually worked well.
Mhm,
But then I just kind of got tired of it, and I got kind of tired of the types of viewers that brought to my channel and how they interacted with this other stuff that I did.
mhm,
So then I tried to experiment and branch out and do some other stuff. Like I talked about like mythology a bit, but then those just never did well at all. So I just kind of decided that, well, this isn't fun anymore,
mhm.
and I can still make videos, just they don't have to be on YouTube.
Sure.
So I did that for my freshman and sophomore years, and I think at some point during my junior year, I just decided not to do it.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had other video responsibilities that were more important to me, so I started focusing on that, and then I just really haven't gone back to it.
Sure, I mean, it's not like you were monetizing it and it was your primary source of income. I mean, having that flexibility to say, I mean, there will be a day when I walk away from this podcast. Being able to do it on your own terms, and I think the lesson there is for anybody that's listening and doing something in their life, having the luxury to be able to walk away from something and just cut ties and walking away with a clear conscience and doing it on your own terms is a luxury that not everybody is afforded, but when you are afforded that opportunity, you should take advantage of it. It's a great feeling to just kind of close that chapter. I mean, life is a series of chapters, and one of the chapters that you wrote in your story is the YouTube story. And at the end of every story or every chapter, there's a period, and then you turn the page and you start a new one. So that's really really cool to hear. I'm curious though. One final question on that before we move on. What was the interest in history? Is that something that you've always been interested in, or
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, I haven't gone back to it since I did YouTube, and honestly, I think it might be because YouTube may have tainted my memories of it.
mm,
But as a kid, I was very interested in history. And I think doing so much on history in such a concentrated point in my life
Hmm.
made it so that I couldn't really go back to it.
Interesting. Interesting.
Because then I would just kind of be reminded of kind of the struggles that I had when I was trying to do research for these topics.
Hmm.
And doing YouTube and doing history, there is a specific, I mean, alternate history specifically. There is a specific community of people who also enjoy that stuff, and that's why those videos are really successful, was because it brought in that community. And when I was growing up, I would watch other alternate history YouTubers because there were interesting topics that I kind of thought were fun.
Hmm.
And then the ones that I watched regularly became ones that I collaborated with and made
Wow.
projects with. And the one who I was like a really big fan of is now like my friend. And we still work together on stuff today.
Wow. It's interesting. And you would have never connected if you hadn't. I mean, YouTube built that connection between the two of you.
Yeah, it did. And thinking back on it, it's just kind of baffling, like to not only meet the person that you admired on YouTube, but to work with them and to continue to work with them and to become friends with them is not something that really anyone has the opportunity to do.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I don't think you and I have talked about this, but listeners of the pod will know, and because I think I've mentioned it a few times, that if I hadn't majored in hospitality, I'm pretty sure I would have majored in history.
Mm,
History was always something that I was passionate about. I was fortunate to travel at a very early age and continue to travel my whole life. And learning about cultures and learning about history of different cultures was always something fascinating to me. And it truly is an endless journey. I mean, you will you will never, whether you're reading Herodotus or reading something about current geopolitical issues, there you will never exhaust stories about history. It truly is wonderful, but it's massive in size. It's hard to pick kind of one thing, whether you focus on European history in the 1700s or you go back to 500 BC. I mean, there's just so much that you could dive into. So that's very, very cool. I appreciate you sharing all that.
yeah.
I want to pivot now, bring us to what you're some of the other things that you're working on now. What is Violet Hour Media and what is the project in production there that you're helping develop and edit content for?
So, Violet Hour Media is a audio drama podcast company that specializes in horror. And how I got into that, it was kind of very weird. Friend of a friend, I met with them, and they sold their script to the company. And because with podcasts, there's not very many people, so everybody does multiple jobs. He sold the script, but then he stayed on to do some pre-production work. And because I met with him, and because I was a aspiring production person, and I had this experience before of doing editing, he said, okay, well, let me just talk to the executive and maybe I can get you an editing job. So that's what happened. And with podcasts, things being cheap is like the strongest emphasis. So being a senior who would do it for free was very important.
Hmm.
So they just kind of brought me on almost immediately. And because I entered in so early, and because there was sort of this understanding that I was sort of an intern, the executive allowed me to participate in pretty much every single step. So I looked at the script, I made some changes based on what I thought needed to be fixed or needed to be clarified. I helped with some pre production work and organizing things. I did a little bit of casting, which was really hard. So I passed it on to someone else because I couldn't figure it out. I set on some recordings. And then right now, my current assignment is to edit the thing
Hmm.
and then pass it off to our sound designer who would add in sound effects and ambience and stuff like that. And I would work with him to problem solve some stuff.
Interesting.
I think because the person who brought me on, the guy who sold the script, he's not involved with it now because the director is now in charge.
Hmm.
But the director only got on halfway through, and the sound designer only came on about a month ago. So, for the exception of the actual executive themselves, I am the only person who's actually been on the project the entire time, even though I'm just some, kind of random unpaid intern.
What is the final? I don't want you to give too much away. What is the final deliverable? Is it a series? Is it each episode is a different chapter of the story?
Yeah, it's exactly like that.
Gotcha.
13 separate, roughly 30-minute episodes published in sequence, kind of like in a episodic story.
Is it a true story or is it?
No, it's a fiction sci-fi horror fiction story. I can't talk much about what it
Yeah,
actually
no.
is,
I'm just.
but
But it's not like your YouTube channel where it's real life stories that you're talking about. I mean, I've
no.
I've listened to a couple podcasts that is kind of like that about crime drama and that whole process. But this is totally all made up. It's total fiction that
Hmm.
you're
Yeah.
that you're creating. That's really cool. So your focus is though of your degree is film production, and this is audio production. Is learning about film production kind of a component of that? What you're doing with audio, or do you envision yourself sometime in the near future starting to take a more concentrated effort on film and video?
I would like to do film more. I think I'd be better with working with film. As I said at the beginning, when you're doing production, it's basically all the same no matter what. So the only difference between doing an audio drama and doing a regular movie is that there's still actors, there's still a script and stuff like that. So the difference is that there's no visual things you have to deal with, and you don't have to have the actors there at the same time. But still scheduling them, hiring them, giving them the script, directing them on what to say, it's all the same. So it is skills that it will contribute to doing regular film-based media. It's just simpler when it's audio only.
If you had to see yourself, if we got out our crystal ball or and we talked to the oracle and we said, "Where is Simon in 15 years?"
Hmm.
Taking into account technology innovation, consumer preferences, the way media is evolving. Where are you in 15 years? Are you in Hollywood? Are you a freelancer? Or do you have your own production company? What does that career path look like where you would ideally want to be in 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, so I've never really had the luxury to think about the future much,
Hmm.
because I spent so much of my life working on the project in front of me. And honestly, I think I'd be okay doing any of it. Having my own production company would be great. Being a freelancer, I don't really think is very feasible if I'm trying to do really full on professional grade stuff.
Why? Just because that's not how you get your foot in the door.
Yeah, if you're trying to do Hollywood movies, you need to be, you have to be have like a standing. You can't just be some random guy who walks onto set one day to do a thing. You either work for the studio or you don't.
Okay, that was my question. Does that mean that you go to work for a, pardon my ignorance here, Simon, but does that mean you go to work for like Sony or Paramount, like those sort of companies? Is that who you would possibly go work for if you wanted to work on those sort of projects?
Yeah, so there's studios and then there's basically just production companies.
Hmm.
Studios are the ones who will pay for things and then they will publish the things and distribute the things.
They're the money folks. I got you. Okay.
And the production company will make the thing.
Got it. Okay. So they're almost like a contractor or a vendor.
Yeah, so usually if you watch a movie and you look at like the title screen and at the title sequence at the very beginning, it'd be Warner Brothers, because they're making whatever movie they're making, and then the next few will be the production companies.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, now I'm never going to look at opening credits the same way.
Yeah, yeah, and famous movie makers usually have their own production companies, but they tend not to be as famous.
Hmm.
Lucasfilms, they were kind of their own production company before they were bought by Disney. So stuff like that. So making my own, working for another one, or even being in a position such as like writing a script and selling it, or something like that, where you kind of you make the thing on your own, you give it to them, and then you're kind of hands off. There's a lot of different avenues you can take in pursuing film.
Interesting. Um, in your spare time, you enjoy studying Japanese
That's correct.
and writing movie and television scripts. Where did the interest in Japanese come from? Are you interested in learning the language? Are you interested in kind of that style of filmmaking, travel there? What's the origin of that?
So, obviously, like we mentioned, I'm into history, and that became less and less like historical events and more kind of culture, I guess.
Hmm.
So I got very interested in a lot of different cultures around the world. But I remember playing a video game that was made in Japan and then was translated and localized for the US. And they made a lot of changes for the US version.
What was the video game? Do you remember?
It's called a Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney.
Okay.
I remember like thinking, okay, this game's kind of weird. And why is it so weird? Oh, it's because it's not American. So then I was researching, well, why did they change these things? And a lot of it was jokes, a joke or a clue or something that made sense in the Japanese language, but not in English.
Hmm.
And then I started researching, well, what are these things in Japanese? Why is this funny in Japanese? Why did this clue make any sense in Japanese? And then I just kind of kept doing that until I was basically just studying the language in its entirety. And then I'm like, well, okay, I guess I'm here now. And then I just kind of committed to it and started doing a little bit of studying every day.
So is that part of your coursework at DePaul that you're going to get a minor or a double major in Japanese, or is it just something you're kind of doing in your spare time?
Currently, it's something I'm doing in my spare time. I don't imagine myself getting a degree in it necessarily, but I think I might take some courses for my free electives, maybe next year, to do like some kind of proper Japanese education.
Talk about this a study abroad I mean, we have multiple study abroads that go to Japan. I mean, that would be an amazing experience. I think many guests on the podcast have really talked about the value and the impact of a study abroad. Being able to just kind of go there and immerse yourself in that culture, I think could be a really powerful learning experience because many people have heard me say before, college isn't just about what happens in the four walls of the classroom. It's about what you do outside of the classroom, whether getting involved in clubs, getting an internship, a job, going on a study abroad, going to networking events, getting a mentor. It's not just about the four walls where there are seats and there's a chalkboard. College should be seen as an educational journey. We as faculty and advisors and the leadership, we're here to kind of support you on that journey. And what you'll realize is that we can give you the framework for how to do it, but at the end of the day, you kind of need to make it your own. That education, particularly undergraduate education, should be seen as a completely bespoke experience, that it's unique to you. So whether it's a study abroad to Japan or whether it's for a couple of free electives, picking up a couple classes in history, joining a club or whatever it is, you make it your own. And that's when in 4 years, when you're walking across the stage and we're handing you your diploma and shaking your hand, you say, you know what? It was totally worth it. I got a lot out of it.
Yeah, and even only having I've taken 2 quarters so far, I'm immediately kind of immediately applying the things that I'm gaining from my college experience. I mentioned sound design, having to use my sound design in my job, but I took a TV production course, and one of the things we had to do was learn to give a pitch
Hmm.
to get bought by a studio. And I am working with one of my friends that I met over YouTube, one of the other creators, to make a pitch and pitch it to a podcast company and make my own podcast. And that's kind of something we have in the works right now.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, Simon, as we kind of wrap up here, I'm so excited about what you're going to bring to the hospitality spirit. I am so impressed with all that you've accomplished. I mean, when I think about where I was at 18, I'm embarrassed how little I achieved and accomplished compared to what you did. And if you are a representation of what the incoming class into DePaul and the incoming class into higher education is like, I think the world is going to be a really exciting place. And I'm looking forward to it. And I can't thank you enough for being a guest on the podcast today. The first recording of the new year, and we started off with a bang. So I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to working with you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for having me.